Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kurbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. On this show, I interview lawyers ditching the billable hour and experts who can help attorneys move beyond billing time. Thanks to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes. More on them later, and use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED when signing up. You get 10% off, and it supports the show. The best way to support the show is to share it with someone you know. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. I'm thrilled to have with me today a very special guest, Jordana Confino. Welcome to the podcast Law Subscribed.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me on and having me today.
Yes. Well, you've been on some pretty high-profile podcasts out there. I heard you on the Happiness Lab, or syndicated through the Fixable podcast. But in any event, just in case my listeners don't listen to those podcasts and they haven't heard of you before or they haven't come across your things, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I consider myself a recovering lawyer and recovering type A+ perfectionist turned positive lawyering professor and coach for lawyers and law students and other high-achieving professionals that are eager to find a way to enjoy greater satisfaction and sustainable success in their lives and work, which I think is hard to come by in the legal profession these days.
Yeah, definitely not the first and not the last recovering attorney on the podcast.
Yeah.
Although I did hear from one of them once that they considered themselves a recovered attorney.
Fascinating. So that's so interesting, and I would be curious to hear what that looks like and what they do now. Are they so they're no longer an attorney and they're living their best lives elsewhere?
They're no longer an attorney, and I've recorded over 100 interviews, and so it's hard for me to know exactly which person it was. And in terms of publication, at the time that this goes live, that episode might not be live yet anyway.
Interesting. Okay. No, I feel like I am very honest and practical about everything that I practice and preach. And so for me, at least, the recovering and the ongoing process of reining in and recalibrating has definitely been applicable, but I have a deep admiration from that person. I will absolutely listen and see what I can learn from them.
Sounds good. Yeah, I think the reason why he said fully recovered is he's not practicing law anymore, and all the damage that it did to him, he had fully recovered from, I think is what the moral of that story was, if you could believe it.
It's impressive. Again, I would be curious to see what he's doing now, because even working tangentially with lawyers and law students, I feel like we experience on steroids what so many other high-achieving perfectionists in other realms of life grapple with in their, mere mortal worlds. And it's just even more extreme and revved up and encouraged and glorified in the legal profession, I think. And so for me, yeah, it's been a process of how do we see these things and intentionally rein them in, as opposed to the challenges go away and are never there. But again, if he's found this green pasture, I would love to go run in it. So I will be intrigued to learn more.
Lawyers, we're always just trying to come up with some clever way to term something anyway. So who knows? It could just be a fun play on words.
Totally. I think mine could also be a disclaimer. Don't sue me if you are not fully 100% recovered from being a lawyer or your perfectionism. No liability here.
Well, let's learn more about your backstory and what brought you to do what you do today. And my listeners would also like to know, were you billing hours?
So yeah, I got to where I am today basically because I was doing the opposite of everything that I now recommend. I was firmly of the mindset that professional success, capital S success, and self-care or any ounce of balance or well-being were mutually exclusive. And so I thought the most successful people are the people that will grind the hardest and dig deeper when no one else can or is willing to. And that's what I was going to do. And that was really how I derived my sense of worth. It seemed to work really, really well at first. And then externally, at least on the inside, I, very quickly and increasingly was feeling like I was dying. But externally, I seemed to be collecting all the gold stars. And then ultimately, it just hit a breaking point in terms of chronic physical illness, anxiety, all of those things came together. And also, I kind of had this, what is it all for question? Like, I'm killing myself for this thing that isn't actually bringing me the satisfaction. And I remember I actually did not bill hours for very long, because what happened was I worked at my 2L summer at a big law firm and was billing that summer. And then afterwards, I clerked for 2 years where I wasn't billing, but the plan was to go back to the big firm. And I actually ended up saying, nope, I'm done I guess declining at that point my offer to return as a third-year associate, because I saw the writing on the wall that it was such a wrong fit. And I do recall the summer that I was at the big firm where everyone was billing, just looking around and being struck by how everyone seemed to be really unhappy, but more importantly, no one seemed to care. It was just expected that this was how it could and should be, and it shouldn't be any other way. And that was, I think, the thing that bothered me the most, because no one seemed to think that it was a problem. And that was just bleak looking forward to me. So no, I actually haven't billed since, but in my role as a professor and then a coach, and then of course, coming up, all of my peers from Yale Law School. I mean, I was, the black sheep who went off this other way and started doing this other work, but I'm well immersed in the world of the billable hour and have seen the impact that it has on people who stay in it, but also the impact on people who stay on it and then leave or aren't in it and then go into it. And so I'm definitely well aware of the effects that it can have. And I will say that I've never once regretted not having to bill time myself in my own career.
Well, those of us who have ditched the billable hour and are still practicing law, you are amongst a flock of black sheep, Jordana. The listeners of this pod, I think they can definitely relate, and the future listeners too, because I always have to imagine any episode could be somebody's first episode. So you were a black sheep, but also I think that was very courageous to do what you did, right? Here's the tried and true path. You worked your butt off to get to that point, and you decided that was not going to be right for you. And yet there are so many lawyers. And in fact, I stand on the shoulder of giants because my subscription-based law practice, I was really following in the footsteps of those who did it before me. And some of them, big law attorneys, mostly women attorneys, burned out by the billable hour, left big law and found a better way to do things. So I have to imagine that, at least from what I've seen, that it takes an immense amount of courage to make that kind of a call.
It definitely did. There were tons of people that I was like, what is wrong with you? Are you having a nervous breakdown? I'm like, actually, maybe a little bit, but I'm actually seeing clearly for the first time in so long. And so it was almost a breakdown that had a very wise revelation. But it's interesting, and I tell this to people a lot, because there's actually research that shows that going to a top tier law school is actually negatively correlated with long-term well-being. And I think it's because the people that keep getting to the next level, or could get the shiny big law billable hour thing, there's that feeling that you have to do it because you can. And sometimes if people burn out, or let's say they don't get that job and they're forced to then think about I couldn't get the shiny should. So what actually makes sense? What do I want? Then they end up so much happier. But it's so easy to, the second, I remember I even went into law school, clerking made no sense to me, but then because I hate solitary research and writing. And so clerking made no sense. And then within 6 months of being in law school, it was who are you going to clerk for? And then who are you going to clerk for next? And all of this, and that was unique to Yale, I think, but at a lot of places, it's the big law model. And there's just these pressures of what we should want and what our worth will be pegged to. And it's completely not related to anything that actually makes sense in terms of what do we want success to feel like, not just like what do we think it should look like and what do we actually want for ourselves. And it's interesting, since I've been in my new role, and especially when I was working as like the dean of professionalism at Fordham, and I was in charge of organizing lots of programs showcasing what lawyer well-being looks like, you see a lot of people coming out of the woodwork that are doing non-traditional things, like someone who went to Stanford Law School and he's like, oh, and I discovered I could have a plaintiff's law firm. And actually, after coming from the big law firm from the billable hour model, like all of a sudden, all of those challenges that made life so hard and painful were just not there. There's a different set of pressures, sure. But in law school, and when people imagine, like, what does it look like? What should I be doing? I think there's these very specific, narrow ideas of the shoulds. And I think a big issue in law school is that no one even tells law students about these other options. You're basically told that you can do like one of three things. And then when you don't even know what you don't know, how could you, look up to or admire people doing these other things, or think about what could I be doing to do that differently? You just kind of get shuttled on towards the path of least resistance, at least initially.
Right. And I'm curious to know from your experience working with law students and attorneys, if some of this stress and pressure and lack of well-being has to do with the fact that most people go to law school, at least in my experience, and having been involved in the ABA, I've actually gotten to know, thousands and thousands of lawyers from different backgrounds, different law schools, et cetera. Like a through line is they went to law school because they do like helping people. And sure, some of them, they maybe wanted to make money in big law, but like underlying that was still like a drive to help people. Yeah. And yet when you're a clerk, for a judge, yes, you're drafting opinions, and that's fun and that's cool. And, it's a sexy part of being a lawyer, but like you're not really helping people. You kind of are, kind of not. And then a big law, like you're just helping big companies fight over money.
Yeah. And actually, there's a really depressing study that shows that over the course of the 1L year alone, law students have a marked shift from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation, and a shift in their desire for becoming lawyers from, like you said, wanting to help other people or give back to society, to more external things like prestige, impressing others, wealth, and the like. And so it's almost like it's baked into the system. We don't even see it happening, and yet people are being pulled in terms of both what they think they need to do and also like what they think that has to look like. And yeah, it's really distressing. I will say I'm fascinated by the current generation, because Gen Z is different. They at least seem to be different in terms of how much they are, I would say, with greater continuity, being like, no, actually, I care about work-life balance and I care about these other things, and I'm not willing to just, sell my soul like the millennials ahead of me or something like that. And it's interesting because you see them persisting in that more and rubbing at either taking different jobs or rubbing against the expectations in these jobs when you get into them. And so you see there's a lot of people freaking out at a lot of the big firms because they're like, what are these junior assistants thinking? Their expectations in terms of how this should go is completely a misfit with the expectations of everyone above them in terms of what they've gone through and what their expectations are.
Yeah, certainly. And even I've noticed some of these, I don't know if they're younger Gen Z or older Gen Alpha, like they seem to be very open too about their mental health. Yeah. Like they talk about, they see their therapist, like it's on their dating profile that they speak to a therapist. So they're just more open about having those conversations that certainly than Gen X and boomers, and a little bit more than millennials as well.
Completely. And this is something that we saw. I think a lot of this was COVID, because I started in my role at Fordham running the Office of Professionalism, which also oversaw our mental health stuff and well-being stuff. I started in early 2019, and the stigma and the caution around these topics, I was like persuading and tricking people into coming to the wellness programs at first. Fast forward a few years and people are banging down the door for the well-being services and asking about them openly. And I think that even in this past 5 years, there's been a radical shift, which I actually think is excellent. But yeah, definitely, I think it's a new thing for sure. And I think there's also a big gap though between the schools and then the employers, because the employers aren't expecting the students and the students' needs and wants coming out. And so that is definitely created for a little bit of a culture clash in the
Right.
past couple of years.
So your business, you're a coach
Yeah.
and a consultant. I love the tagline, empowering perfectionists to move from fear to flourishing.
Yep.
So, the legal profession, we have a penchant for attracting perfectionists.
Yes.
And so whether you're, a law professor who's an attorney teaching law students who are perfectionists, and then the employers have perfectionist ideas, and sometimes these overlap, sometimes they're in conflict with each other, you probably have no shortage of work in light of this profession.
Yes, that is for sure. There is definitely a dire need. And the thing is, there was a need for a long time, but that now is being met by the interest, which I think that the interest, along for the same reasons we were just discussing, now people are realizing like, oh, this is something that I want to focus on. And people are recognizing the relationship between mental health and well-being and actual professional performance and sustainability. And I think that people are no longer thinking that mental health is like a woo-woo, self-help, fluffy nonsense thing. And with the increasing research, and especially this, like with my positive lawyering course and all the science and positive psychology, helping people try to recognize why it's actually like a matter of dire professional importance as well as personal well-being, because turns out that, yeah, the legal profession has gotten really far in these same systems that we've been doing repeatedly, but that doesn't actually mean that they're optimal. And so when I talk to, let's just even look at the perfectionism, the first hurdle to getting perfectionists to want to rein in their perfectionism is getting them to want to. And most of them don't want to because they think that it's a strength. And so when you talk to people and you say, we want to release these perfectionist standards and expectations, we want to release the ruthless self-criticism and the overextending and the excessive people pleasing, they say, but how can I? Because that's what's gotten me here. And what I'm trying to help them see is actually you've gotten here despite all that stuff. And that is actually distinct from the drive, the determination, the commitment to excellence, the high standards, the great work ethic. And if you can get rid of that stuff, and you will not only not lose your edge or any of those positive qualities, you'll actually be more effective. And I think the same thing is true about the legal profession. Like, it's been devoid of any focus on well-being or practices or systems or structures that would facilitate that. And they're like, oh, but look how great we've been doing. So you hear it even from the partners now. They're like, why should I care about associate well-being? Like, for me, balance was balancing my coffee on my desk at 3 a.m. when I was cranking out a memo. And they're like, and I got here. And what I wish that they could understand, and some of them do, is yes, you got here, but you could actually be even more effective than you are now if you weren't sacrificing every aspect of your well-being in the process. Like, you got here despite that, not because of it. And there is a way where we could do just as good work, and if we say good in terms of quality. And again, that doesn't necessarily go with quantity, which I think is a very important point actually for you, without sacrificing our souls and our well-being in the process. And I think that's something, it's a paradigm shift that increasingly people are opening themselves to, but miles to go before we sleep.
Right. And you could also ask that partner, like, what number wife is he on? And yes, he, because it's probably a he.
God.
Like, because the perfectionism in work, but at what sacrifice in personal life as well.
Yeah, no, and that's one thing that I try to talk about with my clients and my students is, let's replace perfectionism with big picture perfection, and big picture perfection being the best overall outcome that is actually attainable in the given circumstances. And so that can be, we can be talking big picture in terms of all of the work on your plate and how you can prioritize, or it can be like how you're going to prioritize between your work and your life and your physical health when you're thinking overall. Because again, like I said, I thought that by digging deeper and digging deeper and digging deeper and working harder, I would do better. And the thing is, like, that works for a little bit of time, but you're digging into something. And then at a certain point, the bottom falls out. And especially given the science showing the relationship between our feelings of belonging and connection and meaning and purpose and physical health and positive emotions and actual optimal peak performance and motivation in the workplace, like we're handicapping ourselves by forsaking all of those things intentionally for the purpose of more is always better, because that's just not true.
This is going to make a great companion episode with I interviewed an attorney who we ended up calling the episode "The Billable Hour is Bad for Your Health," but it was really with a focus on physical health.
Yep.
It was a focus on, you have to sleep, you have to exercise, you have to eat, and then there was one more thing which I forget.
Right.
But it's the four legs of a table, and if any one of these are you can't have all four in a billable hour world. So that brings it back to the billable hour, in my opinion, because I think that there has been, there's lawyer assistance programs, there's other organizations, you're doing you're solving the problem in your particular way. You're helping, whether a firm at a time, a lawyer, a law student, a professor at a time, or what have you, legal professional, high-powered professional at a time. But as a whole, we are looking at it, we're trying to solve it from a Band-Aid perspective.
Totally.
We are, the system is screwed up. And you and I and these organizations, we could still solve it, the problems with Band-Aids, but how do we go to the source? How do we prevent the need from getting injured in the first place? And I think, and I'm curious to know what your perspective on it is, that the billable hour is a massive cause, if not in some instances the singular cause, of people's lack of well-being in the profession as attorneys. What have you seen, and what's your opinion on that?
Yeah. And I just want to say thank you for recognizing a lot of the work that I do is within the billable model construct. And when I go into firms, I'm like, I'm not going to tell you to touch the billable hour because I know you're not going to. And so let's talk about what we can do within these systems. But it's the same thing in law firms. It's the billable hour. In law schools, it's the curve. Mm-hmm. Neither of them makes sense. Right. And both of them are horrible, both for learning and development, and also the outcomes that we actually want, and also for well-being. I do not think that the billable hour is the singular cause of lawyer well-being issues, because I know tons of lawyers that struggle with well-being issues that are not in the billable hour. Do I think that it is an enormous, exacerbating factor? And when I say enormous, I mean enormous, 100%. And I think there is in no world that the billable hour is in any way good for well-being. And I think it raises tons of challenges that we're at, through which even if everything else was perfect, that itself would be problematic for sure. I also, by the way, just don't think that the billable hour makes sense, because it's creating I don't see who it creates good incentives for, but that's just, another thing. But in terms of its impact on well-being, it is objectively pretty terrible.
Right. And I think that there are a lot of recovering attorneys out there that may still be practicing law if it wasn't for the billable hour. They would have, they just didn't know that there was another way. Meanwhile, here we are. We're a growing contingent of attorneys leveraging the subscription and fixed fee model, or a combination, to deliver legal services. And not there's tons of financial reasons to do that. Yeah. The amount of revenue you could earn isn't capped, and how many hours there are in a day that you could bill and collect on. The financial incentive is there. The market opportunity is there. Most people are not hiring lawyers because of expensive billable hours. So if you have alternative fees that they could have pricing certainty, they will hire you. And the majority of my clients are in that category. They've never worked with a lawyer before, so the financial incentives are there. But I also think, and I don't have a lot of evidence to back this up, and whenever I give CLEs on this topic, I just sort of reference this, is that the mental health, the well-being, the whole person of who you are improves when you remove that from the equation. Think about when you're working with lawyers, how much more you could accomplish if they were not tied to that billable hour.
Completely. There's no question. And I feel like the negative effects on mental health and all health from the billable hour, I think they come in different ways. So there's the direct and the indirect effects. So first of all, depending on the firm, sometimes the billable hour, where they're set in terms of the expectations, they just leave not nearly enough space in the day to do what I like to say, like the bare non-negotiables in terms of things that are necessary to maintain your mental and physical health. So going back to you mentioned the physical health, sleep. I mean, that's a huge thing for, I mean, it's physical health, but it's mental health too. Like if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not getting enough social connection, which actually fuels you, if you're not getting movement, like these things will impact your mental health as well as your physical health. Also, by the way, they have such a tremendous impact on your cognitive functioning. And so that's something where it's such a head scratcher for me. And here the billable hour definitely comes into play, because what I'm constantly telling my clients is you will get time back in terms of your efficiency and your effectiveness in your work if you spend some time cultivating these different aspects of your well-being. But if someone's just measuring you on the sheer hours worked, and if you're actually honestly billing your hours, which is a whole other thing, and I'm thinking about perfectionists in particular who tend to underbill their hours, which then leads to all sorts of bad effects in terms of burnout, other things like that. If it's just more hours is better, you can't even make the efficiency or the enhanced performance argument in terms of the benefits that people will get for investing in their well-being. So it just crowds out the space. And you see this both in terms of their individual practices, but then things like when you're like, oh, partners, you should be engaging in mentorship. You should be like, turns out all of this science and organizational psychology shows that feelings of belonging and feeling like you matter and your work matters, that actually like turbocharges motivation and work performance among attorneys or employees. And so if you could spend these times cultivating these relationships with these junior employees, that will actually motivate them to work better, right, way more than fear or, pressure. But for the partners, how do you get them to do it? Because if they're chasing the billable hour, it's like, well, that time isn't billable. And so we've got this billable versus non-billable time, which just implicitly but very strongly devalues everything else. And those things too could be things that could be enhancing well-being. And then there's just something that happens psychologically when we are stripping performance assessments from the qualitative nature of the work, and we're just making it numerical and checking a box where it pulls away any kind of inherent satisfaction or validation of doing a good job. And it's always just like more is always better in that way. And so there's so many different things. And then there's just the thing that you can never turn off, you can never pause. And so this is one thing that I noted. I have a lot of friends who have actually gone from big law to government positions. And the most notable thing is like their work might be even harder and higher stakes in their government positions, but they're like, but I can breathe because it's not like there's constant thing that's like, you are making a decision right now. If you take a break now, it's like you're burning money because their bonuses or other things are just tied to an hour more. And it just makes us think about our time and also just everything in our life in this quantifiable way that ends up stripping it of its inherent value, which is really destructive on multiple levels.
You said something that I just want to touch on. You said the billable hour devalues everything else. And I think you're right. Yeah. So something that I've been telling folks who are having a hard time moving away from the billable hour is everything that you do that's not billable, don't think of it as, wow, that 6-minute breathing exercise just cost me $200. You think that's worth 10 times my billable rate. That conversation I had with my dad, that time I spent with my kid, like make it worth more than what your billable rate is. And you'll start thinking about that time as actually being more valuable than the time you spend billing. What do you think about that?
No, I completely agree. It's almost like if you're in a race, it's almost like if you're in a race car, right? And your goal is to like get across the country as fast as possible, although who's running a race course across country, but bear with me. And you have to stop to fuel up. So first of all, you don't want to fuel at all, but let's say there's like this high power fuel that will actually like make your engine run so much better. But it takes longer to fill up. And so you're like, I don't have this time. I can't take the time to do it because I just need to get over there. When we don't realize is like actually taking this time will make us so much better able to get where we want to go. But if we're just thinking about it as time spent in each moment, with each moment kind of being equally valuable, regardless of what we're doing with it in that way, we'll never open ourselves to creating the time if you feel like the clock is always ticking on you. Not to mention, how can you ever be present, which is important for both connection, enjoyment, but also focus, if you're constantly thinking in 6-minute increments and watching the clock?
Have you heard the story of the two lumberjacks?
No.
Okay, this is good because this is exactly what you said about the race car analogy, right? So there's two lumberjacks. I don't think we've ever told this story on the podcast before. It's known. It's out there. They're both chopping wood all day. And they both wake up at the same time. They start chopping wood at the same time. They start chopping wood at the same time, but in the middle of the day, one of the lumberjacks goes away, just disappears, while the other lumberjack is still like nonstop chopping wood. And then the other lumberjack comes back and starts chopping wood again. And at the end of every day, the lumberjack who goes away and comes back has chopped more wood than the other lumberjack.
Yep.
And so one day, the lumberjack who's not chopping as much wood and doesn't take any breaks asks, like, where do you go? How do you do it? I'm chopping wood all day nonstop. Yeah. And what's your secret? And the lumberjack who goes away says, well, when I leave in the middle of the day, it's to sharpen my axe.
Yep, completely. I love that so much. And it reminds me so much, like even when I'm talking to people, they're like, oh, I don't have time for coaching. I don't have time to focus on this. I'm like, believe me, you don't have time not to, because the amount of energy and time that you're wasting plowing forward without understanding how to replenish yourself. And then also, by the way, all of the other things that go hand in hand with gauging ourselves by these metrics and all of the kind of self-doubt and self-criticism and self-flagellation that goes with it, it's all beating us down. And yet we've been almost trained to believe that that's how to propel ourselves forward. And it's very counterintuitive.
So, something else that I've learned about perfectionism, having like been one, and still, there are still elements of me who's a perfectionist, right? Is the lack of resilience due to having never failed and learning from failure, right? Like, what's been your experience with that?
Completely. And it's really, so first of all, a lot of law students experience this, where they're just completely traumatized by their grades, or when they get their legal memo back looking like it's bleeding in red line. And then a very perfectionist fixed mindset approach is, well, I'm just going to stay away from anything where I could get constructive feedback, and I'm going to stick to the things that I know that I'm good at and avoid putting myself out there because it's just too painful to experience the learning curve of trying something new, and making mistakes, which is necessary if you're ever going to learn, grow, and increase your skills. And it's interesting, the population that comes to me most frequently for help reining in their perfectionism, because they've realized that it's actually now holding them back professionally as well as personally. It's not the junior associates. For them, the perfectionism can just cause them to completely burn out because they're trying to say yes and perfect everything, which is not possible. But then if they're trying to move towards partnership, you have to be willing to challenge yourself and take risks and be willing to try new things and put yourself out there, even if it means that you're not going to do them absolutely perfectly, because without that, you can't step into those higher levels of responsibility. And so many perfectionists will just like keep themselves small out of this self-preservation and this belief that making a mistake is the worst possible thing. And then similarly for associates, the overextending. So with perfectionism, the people pleasing comes in. And so it's, I have to say yes. I need to bill as much as possible. I need to, be the yes person. I need to show that I can do everything, but we can't do everything. And at least we can't do everything optimally, simultaneously. And that's something where the billable hour comes in, because it's this tension between quantity and quality, right? And so what I'm always telling people is like, yeah, they want you to say yes and they want you to bill all the hours, but they also want you to produce damn quality work product. And they're going to judge you if you don't do that too. And so you have to intentionally navigate this trade-off. It's like, do I want them to judge me for saying no to that thing, or maybe billing fewer hours, or putting in higher quality work on the things that I'm doing? And I think that's somewhere where the billable hour requirements can send very mixed signals there about what's actually more important, quality or quantity.
Right. And I kind of want to capsule everything that you just said about this perfectionism mindset, apply to if you want to raise in the ranks at a law firm, and extrapolate that and apply it to ditching the billable hour for subscriptions or some alternative fee. Because, the billable hour, one of the reasons it's so resilient is it's dead simple. It took me this long. It's worth this much. It doesn't require a lot of thinking. It does require tracking and billing and collecting on those receivables, but it's dead simple. Subscriptions, flat fees, a combination of those. It requires experimentation. It requires failure. Like my law firm, Subscription Attorney LLC, I called myself the founding attorney of that firm.
Yeah.
Because I consider myself a startup founder, and I'm trying to apply agile methodology and build the boat and improve the boat as I sail it, which means there's going to be failure. It's not going to be perfect. You're doing something new that there's a lot of, like, this podcast can exist because different lawyers are using subscription in different ways.
Yeah.
And so we're all learning from all of that, but we're all experimenting. And when you're experimenting, you can't be perfect. It's not an option.
Absolutely. No, it's like the devil you know is worse than the unknown, or the uncertain. I think that you're right. It's safe, it's secure, it's stable. Even if it's kind of guaranteed misery, if that's the case. Yeah. It's still at least stable and predictable and safe in that way. Whereas the unknown is unknown. And I will say I am so not one of those people that I feel like there's a lot of entrepreneurs like, oh, I've always had an entrepreneurial bone, like spirit. And I'm like, I've never had an entrepreneurial bone in my body. And it actually was all of the work that I was doing on my perfectionism when I was very much working for an employer that then opened me to recognizing, like, oh, there could be something better out there. And it's worth taking a leap and trying it, as opposed to just operating out of fear. And that's what I think I mentioned earlier, that perfectionism is distinct from all of these positive things that we tend to associate it with, like drive, determination, commitment to excellence. And what I really think that perfectionism is this fear and shame-based motivation for high performance, which is not only, people think that if they just perfect and they perform and they bill enough and they reach that hurdle, then they'll be happy, then they'll have this pride and satisfaction. Of course, it never works that way because we just move the goalpost further. But also when we're running on that fear and shame-based motivation, it precludes us from actually enjoying the intrinsic motivation for whatever we're doing, which would make us happier, but actually also make us much better at our work too. And so I think that that's a really important point.
So you said you never really billed hours, and at least as an attorney. But you're a coach, you're a consultant. Like, you do coaching, speaking, workshops, you do advisory-related things. So what's your business model?
So I'll say that my business model, so in a sense, I guess I don't bill hours. And so either my business model for consulting is there will be a package or a program rate for my clients, my individual clients. So I always do a multi-session in a package over time. And yes, there will be a certain number of sessions in it, but I also have unlimited back and forth and support with my clients in between, which I know is actually really, really different than a lot of coaches. And so I don't say it's this much per hour per session, because it would make no sense, because every session there's like the time I spend with them, but then there's like all of the time that I spend processing it afterwards and the things I send them in between and that engagement. And for me, I've found that the quality of my interaction with each client is actually so much more important to me than the quantity of clients. And so there's different models of doing things. And I'm like, I'd rather work with fewer clients and work deeply and feel like I'm really having that positive impact, as opposed to like, you're paying me for an hour and I get this. And so I guess it would be, it's not a subscription model because people do pay for a finite amount of time, but it's not a billable hour model either.
It's not an infinite subscription. Like it's not a they're subscribed forever kind of a
Right.
thing. But if they have their package from you is 12 sessions over 12 months and they pay for that every month, that's an annual subscription paid on a monthly basis, Jordana.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think that it makes us, I think it makes me able to serve them a lot better. So I think from the client's perspective, it makes a lot more sense. And then there's also just a thing to be said. I mean, there's research that shows that when we start thinking about our time in terms of how it corresponds to a specific dollar amount, it literally destroys our intrinsic motivation because we just start thinking about people and minutes in terms of dollars, and that's not actually tied with doing the best work. And so one of the reasons why I tell people I don't, pay for sessions is because I hate having that transaction. And I think that being on the mind of both people really impedes like the best possible work from being done. And so, yeah, I think that taking the transactional sense out of it, but also I think tying things to quality and what are you getting as opposed to how much time did I spend producing it for you? Because it doesn't even make sense. I mean, thinking about legal questions, but the same is true for coaching questions. It's like there's something that maybe it would take tons of time to do, but anyone could do it versus like, yes, this decision or this determination or this guidance was done rather quickly, but it is so unique and so coveted and so valuable that it's worth, 100 hours of someone's time. And I think paying for value just makes a lot more sense than paying for time.
I mean, you're not going to get any pushback from me on that.
And I will say that this is something that works against me as someone who lives under a rock and has not yet at all. I know that we're being transcribed by AI right now, but who has not yet learned how to make AI work for me. I need to, because there's no doubt that things currently take me way longer to do than probably some other people who like have their AI assistant in their pocket would do. But I'm not going to charge my clients more for that because again, they're getting the value. And if I can learn to be more efficient, that'd probably be good for me. But yeah.
Well, so here's the thing, like, let's talk about the Zoom AI, right? Because Zoom AI is running in the background now. So what that's going to do is at the end of our conversation, and it's agnostic. It doesn't know that this is a podcast interview, right? It's just going to assume.
Now.
Well, yes, yeah, right. Well, like we're going like that. We're having a meeting. Like that's how it's like trained. Like it's sharing meeting summary notes. So I'll get an email that has meeting summary notes. And what I like to do, and people's names, some other proper nouns might be misspelled or miscategorized, but they're usually really good. And so what I like to do is I just like to forward those to the other person I had a conversation with because they might like those notes summary. It's it's included in the package I'm paying for on Zoom. So unless you're like I don't have that turned on when I'm having attorney-client conversations because I don't want the Zoom model training on that, remembering that conversation. But for like non-privileged communications, it's an amazing resource. And that could be a value add to record the conversations, to record your sessions, to have them transcribed, to have them summarized, that your clients can return to review. I think that is an incredible resource. And as long as they're a subscriber, maybe they continue to be able to access those kind of things.
And this is how your model incentivizes efficiency. Because for me, I currently spend like 30 to 40 minutes after each session taking my notebook and typing up a recap for the client with next steps. So you're right. It is on me. I'm incentivized. Like, let me figure out how to use this tool efficiency to provide the same value. Because right now I'm the one paying for that time effectively, not the client. But the opposite is true, right? In the law firms where if we were having an important business meeting, there would be an associate in the meeting who was billing their time to be there taking notes. And then all of a sudden that goes away. That's an existential crisis now for them. And that's why I think that it's interesting because the work that I do is so human-centered. And I feel like there's kind of two revolutions that are happening within the legal industry. So one is tech and AI-centered, and the other is human-centered because once we account for everything that the robots can do better than we can, what's left, what's not rendered obsolete, is actually this human stuff. And so I think, yeah, but the incentives there is like, how do we fight the robots? Because right now the client is giving us more money for that fifth person in the room taking notes.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. And even though you're not using AI every day, and I am, I came to the exact same conclusion as you. The highest value, if you want to talk about the value that lawyers, that professionals can give their clients, it's the human things.
Yeah.
Let's use the AI to get the work done in a fraction of the time that it used to take when humans were doing it in human hours and human time.
Yeah.
But let's just give that human connection and all those other human things that the AI can't do, and that's the added value. And there's a lot more to it, right? Like the lawyers will be able to provide better input to the AI and be able to critique and determine the value of the output and what more back and forth needs to be done. But you're still talking about a massive fraction of the time, or a massive reduction in time of producing product for a client, and quicker turnaround time is more valuable and more human-centric, more person-centric, right? Like,
Yeah.
you need that thing done, boom, it's done right now. I just did it for you, right? Like if you use Zoom to communicate with your clients, you get permission for them to turn on the AI summary and you're off to the races. They already have, and you don't need to just forward them the Zoom meeting notes, but you could take those, copy and paste them into a doc, update them with your own notes, and it took you a fraction of the time. And Zoom might have heard something that you didn't think was important, but now you think it's important, right?
Yeah.
The AI tools are amazing. So with that, though, I think we're starting to get close on time here, and I want to be respectful of yours, though.
Yeah.
We're not billing it for this conversation. It's still good to respect people's time. So with that, I just want to wrap up with a question I like to ask all my guests, Jordana, and that is a hot dog a sandwich, and why?
So it's so funny. I will admit that I thought about this in advance because I listened, and I've been giving serious thought to this, and I do not think it's a sandwich because I feel like a sandwich is something that you have to eat with two hands. Like you have to be able to hold it shut to eat it, which suggests that there's like a hat and a base and something in between. And for a hot dog, it doesn't. No one eats a hot dog with two hands, and if no one eats it with two hands, I don't think it could be a sandwich.
So is a hot dog a sandwich for children who need to use two hands to eat a hot dog?
Oh, that's interesting. Do children eat hot dogs with two hands?
They have tiny hands and tiny mouths, and hot dogs are the same size.
I would just say give them the little baby pigs in blankets if you're at it, because those are just so adorable and so much tastier. And there's no question that that's not a sandwich.
Okay. These are the questions of our day.
Exactly.
If people want to follow up with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Absolutely. So my website is JordanaConfino.com. And on there, you'll find my blog, which is Chronicles of a Recovering Type A Plus Perfectionist, which is basically exactly what it sounds like. I'm also on LinkedIn, so you can find me there, Jordana Confino. And yeah, I would love to hear from anyone who is intrigued by this conversation. I love connecting with fellow recovering perfectionists and lawyers and the like. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
All right, we'll sign off. Thanks so much again for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
And that's our show. Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for being sponsors. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with somebody you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn, since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email kurbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.